start talking about these covert contracts,
Yeah.
sometimes you can get lost in like the day-to-day stuff.
Right.
The stuff that's right in front of you.
Yeah.
But to really understand these things, I think we need to like go deeper.
Yeah.
Look at like the historical forces that have shaped these institutions that we live with.
It's like you're looking at a building, and you just see some cracks in the wall. You don't really know what's going on unless you look at the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. And today we're going to be doing some digging into the Protestant work ethic.
Okay.
We're going to be taking a look at an excerpt from a book
All right.
by Conrad Riker called The Power of the Protestant Work Ethic.
Interesting.
And what's so fascinating about the Protestant work ethic, or the PWE as it's often called, is how it's woven itself into so many aspects of Western society,
It really has.
even those that seem so far removed from its religious origins.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
So let's start with the basic. Where did this whole Protestant work ethic thing come from?
Well, as the name suggests, it's rooted in the Protestant Reformation, a period of just immense change in the Christian world. And thinkers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, they emphasized hard work and discipline and self-control, not just as moral virtues, but as signs of God's favor.
So it's like if you were successful in life, it wasn't just because of like good luck or fortune.
Exactly.
It's a sign that you were like living, right?
Yeah.
That you had God's blessing.
You were one of the elect.
Interesting. So this idea, initially a religious belief, it eventually became secularized, influencing how people viewed work success, even their place in society.
Yeah, and their place in the cosmos even.
So how did this religious idea transform into something that shaped entire society?
Right.
Like what happened after these early Protestant thinkers?
It's important to understand the historical context, These ideas were emerging during a time of just significant economic and social change in Europe.
Okay.
The rise of mercantilism and early capitalism really placed a high value on industriousness and the accumulation of wealth.
So the Protestant work ethic, with its emphasis on hard work and discipline,
Yeah.
it just fit right in
It fit right in.
with those emerging economic forces.
Yeah, it provided a moral and spiritual framework for this new way of thinking about work and success.
And as European settlers brought these ideas to America,
Right.
they found fertile ground
Yeah.
in the New World.
Absolutely.
This reminds me of something that Riker talks about in the book.
Okay.
This guy named Roger,
Okay.
who lived in the 1920s.
Right.
And he's like this classic rags to riches story,
Oh, wow.
rising from poverty to build a successful business
Okay.
through sheer hard work and determination.
So he really embodied the PWE.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And Roger's story is a great example of the PWE in action.
Yeah.
He embodied those core values of diligence, self-reliance, and this belief that hard work leads to success.
Right.
And his story became such a powerful symbol of the American dream.
It's a classic story.
It is a classic story, but wasn't it more than just working hard?
Yeah.
Didn't the Protestant work ethic also emphasize education and self-improvement?
Absolutely. Education was huge. For them, education wasn't just about acquiring knowledge.
Yeah.
It was about cultivating a disciplined mind and moral character. They believed that by bettering yourself,
Right.
you were fulfilling your potential and contributing to society.
So it was really this combination of hard work and self-discipline and a commitment to education
Right.
that fueled the rise of guys like Rogers and shaped the American dream as we know it.
Yeah, it provided a blueprint.
Yeah,
And success.
but it's important to note, I think, that while the PWE has undoubtedly had a profound impact on society,
Oh, yeah.
it's also a complex and nuanced concept
It is.
that has been subject to much debate and criticism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some downsides
There are.
to a worldview that puts so much emphasis on work and achievement.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to see how it could lead to burnout and stress and just an unhealthy obsession with material success.
Right. It's all about balance.
Yeah.
And as we move forward, I think we should dig into some of those criticisms and complexities in more detail.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
Right.
We've been talking about the Protestant work ethic and how it, influenced like individual success in the American dream. But, I'm curious how it played into something that we kind of touched on earlier,
Yeah.
which is like these power structures and institutions we live with. Like, did the PWE have any impact there?
Absolutely. One area where the PWU had a really significant impact is in shaping ideas about gender roles.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the Protestant Reformation was happening in like a very different time.
It was.
With very different social norms than we have today.
Exactly. Early Protestant thinkers drawing on biblical interpretations, they really emphasized the idea of distinct spheres for men and women. Men were seen as the providers,
Right.
responsible for working outside the home,
Yeah.
supporting the family financially. Women, on the other hand, were expected to focus on domestic duty,
Okay.
creating a nurturing home environment, raising children.
So those traditional gender roles were like deeply intertwined with the PWE's emphasis on work and family.
Absolutely.
But how did those ideas evolve over time, especially like as society changed?
Yeah, it's important to remember that the PWE, despite its origins in religious doctrine, wasn't static. It evolved alongside the societies it influenced.
Yeah.
Take the Industrial Revolution, for example. As factories sprung up and cities grew, the demand for labor increased dramatically.
And suddenly women's contributions outside the home became like more economically necessary.
Exactly. Economic realities began to challenge those traditional gender roles. More and more women entered the workforce, although often facing discrimination and lower wages, of course.
Right. It's interesting how the PWE, like both reinforced existing gender roles, but in a way also helped lay the groundwork for their eventual transformation.
It's true. Yeah, that's a great point. It highlights the complexity of these historical forces.
Yeah.
And even today, we're still grappling with the legacy of the PWE and its impact on gender dynamics.
Absolutely.
It's an ongoing conversation.
Speaking of today, like, how does the Protestant work ethic hold up in the modern world?
Right.
Things are changing so rapidly with technology, automation, the gig economy.
It's a different world.
Like, does this centuries-old concept even still apply?
That's the million-dollar question. A lot of people are asking that, and honestly, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
The traditional PWE, with its focus on long hours, unwavering dedication to a single employer, the idea that hard work alone guarantees success, it's certainly being challenged.
It seems like that old model of working for one company your entire career is fading fast.
You're right. In today's world, adaptability, flexibility, a diverse skill set are often more valuable than sheer endurance.
So does that mean the Protestant work ethic is obsolete? Like, are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Not necessarily. While the specific ways in which work is organized and valued are changing, I think the core principles of the PWE, things like diligence, personal responsibility, a commitment to self-improvement, are still incredibly relevant.
Okay, so it's like we need to update the operating system, but the core hardware is still solid.
Exactly. The challenge is adapting those core principles to the realities of the 21st century.
So how do we do that? Like, how do we reconcile this historical concept with the demands of the modern world?
I think it starts with recognizing that hard work alone isn't enough.
Okay.
We need to be strategic, cultivate valuable skills, and be willing to adapt to a constantly changing landscape.
So it's more about working smarter, not just harder.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing the importance of balance. The traditional PWE, with its relentless focus on work, could easily lead to burnout and neglect of personal well-being.
Yeah, there's a growing awareness these days, I think, of the importance of like mental health and work-life balance.
Absolutely. So, in a way, we need to evolve our understanding of the work ethic to include a healthy dose of self-care mindfulness and the ability to set boundaries.
It's not just about like striving for success, it's about striving for like a sustainable and fulfilling life.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of the PWE that's often overlooked, its spiritual dimension.
Oh, right. We can't forget that this whole concept was born out of a deeply religious worldview.
That's right. And while we've been talking about the PWE in a largely secular context, it's important to remember that for early Protestants, work wasn't just about material success or social standing. It was about something deeper, something more profound.
What do you mean?
For them, work was a calling, a way to serve God and glorify Him through their efforts.
This was about purpose, about finding meaning in their daily labors.
Exactly. And while that might seem like a quaint idea in today's secular world, I think there's something powerful about the notion of work as a form of service, as a way to contribute to something larger than yourself.
It's like finding that sweet spot where your passions and talents intersect with the needs of the world.
Precisely. And I think that's a valuable insight we can glean from the PWE, even if we don't subscribe to its religious underpinnings.
So even in our modern, often cynical world, the idea of work as a calling, as a way to find meaning and purpose, it still resonates.
It does. It's a deep-seated human desire.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've talked about the historical roots of the PWE, its influence on everything from individual success to gender roles, and its evolving relevance in like a rapidly changing world.
We've touched on its potential pitfalls too, like the risk of burnout and the overemphasis on material success at the expense of well-being.
Right. It's not a perfect system, but I think what's really striking is how this one concept born out of religious fervor centuries ago has had such a lasting and pervasive influence on society.
It really has. It speaks to the power of ideas to shape the world we live in, and it underscores the importance of understanding those ideas, their origins, and their ongoing evolution.
So where do we go from here? How can we take what we've learned about the PWE and apply it to our own lives?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that the PWE, like any complex social phenomenon, is neither inherently good nor bad.
Okay.
It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for both constructive and destructive purposes.
So it's about being mindful of its strengths and weaknesses and using it in a way that aligns with our own values and goals.
Exactly. We can draw inspiration from its emphasis on diligence, self-reliance, and the pursuit of excellence, while also being aware of the potential for overwork, burnout, and a narrow definition of success.
It's about finding that balance between striving for achievement and nurturing our own well-being.
Precisely. And it's about remembering that work at its best can be a source of meaning, purpose, and connection to something larger than ourselves.
Well said. As we've been talking about the Protestant work ethic, one thing that keeps coming up for me is this tension between individual effort and the larger systems at play.
Oh, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, like on the one hand, the PWE tells us that, hard work and self-reliance are the keys to success.
Right.
But on the other hand, we can't ignore the reality of things like systemic inequality, economic downturns, or just plain bad luck.
It's like we're all trying to climb this ladder, but the rungs are always shifting.
Exactly. And that brings me back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Those coverts that often operate within relationships and institutions.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, like how does a concept like the PWE, which emphasizes individual responsibility and effort, how does that intersect with these often unspoken expectations and power dynamics that shape our interaction?
It's complicated because if you're operating under the assumption that hard work always equals success, you might be less likely to even question those covert contracts, even if they're not serving you well.
You might blame yourself for not working hard enough.
Exactly.
Rather than recognizing the systemic factors at play.
You're blaming yourself when you should be blaming the system, man.
It's almost like the PWE, while empowering in some ways, can also blind us to the ways in which, larger forces are shaping our lives.
It's like you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder how we can use this understanding of the PWE, both its strengths and its limitations, to actually navigate those covert contracts more effectively.
Well, I think the first step is awareness,
Yeah.
We need to be conscious of those unspoken expectations, those unwritten rules that govern so much of our interaction.
Right.
And we need to be willing to question them.
And to recognize that sometimes those contracts are based on outdated assumptions or power imbalances.
Absolutely. We need to be willing to renegotiate those contracts to assert our own needs and values. And sometimes that might even mean walking away from a situation that's no longer serving us.
It's like we need to develop a kind of critical awareness of the PWE itself, to embrace its emphasis on self-reliance and diligence, while also being wary of its potential to make us blind to these larger systemic issues.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the Protestant work ethic, what are some key takeaways our listeners can think about as they kind of continue to explore these ideas?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say it's about recognizing just how pervasive the influence of the PWE really is.
Yeah.
It's all around us, shaping our assumptions about work success, even our relationships.
And realizing that it's not just some historical relic.
Right.
It's still shaping our world in really profound ways.
Absolutely. Second, I'd encourage listeners to be critical thinkers, to question the assumptions baked into the PWE, to consider its strengths and weaknesses, and to think about how its principles might be adapted to fit the realities of their own lives.
It's about taking ownership of this concept, rather than just being passively shaped by it.
Exactly. And finally, I'd say it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
The balance between striving for achievement and nurturing our well-being, between individual effort and systemic awareness, between the historical legacy of the PWE and the evolving needs of the present.
It's a lot to ponder, but I think it's important work.
It is.
And for anyone who wants to delve deeper into this fascinating topic, we highly recommend checking out The Power of the Protestant Work Ethic by Conrad Riker.
Great book.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Definitely worth a read.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.